Hey, it's Christopher Cardinal, and you're listening to the super fantastic, above average, racing, spectacular. Hey, everyone. This is the long anticipated bonus episode number 2 of our program. And all on this day, we are on a Monday of all places, time and places. A Monday, we are covering all things MBNA 2000, MBNA 400 back from 2001. I'm fired up about this episode. I know, and I'm going to promise to be real delicate with the topics in this episode, as this was the first race post 9/11. September 2001. The American people and really the whole world was in shock, and it was a turbulent time in American history. But what came from that was how it was extraordinary to see how the country rallied and was quite resilient and was able to build back the fabric that made up the United States of America, and as the country that most people have known and have loved. And there's so much patriotism in this time frame that I think it was quite evident in this race. You could see the evidence of that in the stands that day at Dover. I think the race itself was a step in the right direction for the healing process, for the nation, for all the people. And I just think I went back and watched this race. It's really for the first time since 2001, as I didn't really keep up with reruns or replays of races through the years. I know there's a lot of topics we are going to cover in this program, and I think it's always refreshing to go back and just see how the product has changed so much. And it's 2001. We're only talking 17 years here, but what a transitional period in NASCAR history. I think, honestly, I've said it and I said it again, I think 2001 was the most memorable year of my NASCAR fandom. Tragedy struck early in the years. We all know Dale Earnhardt Sr. would lose his life in the Daytona 500 that year. And it was just a banner year for DEI. They just, again, like the country, going through tragedy at 9/11, DEI was such a resilient organization that year. They just rallied around adversity and found ways to make the best of the situation. And I think that's a testament to the three drivers that were part of the stable at that time: Michael Waltrip, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and Steve Park. And man, it's just memorable race after memorable race. We're going to cover a lot of those events in 2001. I can't wait to dive into some of those topics in the coming months when it comes to the 2001 season, because I think that's the greatest season in NASCAR history. And that's just that from me speaking personally in my experiences following the sport. I mean, that could waver someone else's opinion, and that's not my objective here. I think it's just I'm going out and saying arguably the greatest year in NASCAR history, but that's just me freestyling. Let's say you. So Dale Jr., what a difficult year for Dale Jr. I think he loses his old man in the first race, and there's a lot of high hopes that year for Earnhardt Jr. I think he was just coming off a great rookie season. This is really when we start to see the evolution of Dale Jr., the popularity of the number 8 Budweiser Chevrolet. And, it was a tragic tale how that run ended with DEI. But for the time being, man, I mean, going back to 04, 03, wasn't this is one of the most iconic cars on the track, and it had, I guess, looking back, I mean, it had the potential to be one of the greatest teams to ever race in NASCAR, much to the iconic numbers and team combinations we've seen through the years of Jeff Gordon and the Rainbow Warriors, Dale Sr. himself with the black number 3 GM Goodwrench car, even the Wrangler car back with his days with Bud Moore, and Mark Martin and the Valvoline car. Bobby Lubani and the Excite batteries, Tony Stewart Home Depot. So many iconic combinations through the years. Ken Schrader and the Skull Bandit. More like Harry Gant and the Skull Bandit. I think most people would remember Schrader for the Budweiser 25 at Hendrick. I mean, you just go through Matt Kenson and DeWalt in the 17. There's so many great iconic schemes out there and team owner combinations that I think it's hard to really say definitively what is the greatest. But I'd have to say the 8 and Dale Jr. in the Budweiser scheme, top 5, easily. So this is a post 9/11 race, and I think America was and the NASCAR community was just in mourning. The healing process was about to begin here. I think this is what this race did. And I said 2001 was chock full of memorable races. Harvick winning his second career start in Atlanta, subbing for Dale Earnhardt Sr. that year, taking over the reins of the number 3, which was morphed into the number 29. Waltrip winning the Daytona 500. You had that Pepsi 400 1-2 finish in Daytona. That was monumental for Dale Jr. I still think that could go down as one of Dale Jr.'s crowning achievements in NASCAR, winning that race. Waltrip in the runner-up position. The 2 DEI cars battling it out. Sensational event. I mean, we're going to cover that at some point. I mean, that's a race that not to be missed, and I would love to go back and comb through that one and just talk about it in long form, because I think it's one of the historical events in the history of the sport. You had a lot of first-time winners that year. I think it was the year where, as I said, it was a transition. It was coming from the 90s where you saw the dominance of guys like Jeff Gordon, and Bobby Labonte was making his way up the ranks, Dale Jarrett, Mark Martin. This is where it was shifting a little. I'm not saying that these guys weren't relevant. As you saw, we saw career resurgences from Bill Elliott, Ricky Rudd in the same time frame. So it wasn't as if there was an actual changing of the guard was well on the way. You were just seeing some different drivers starting to finally hit their stride and become a factor in the Cup Series on a weekly basis. Look, we have now. You fast forward 2018. You have the big 3 who seemingly own the sport now. But as we saw yesterday with Chase Elliott, which we're going to talk about him a lot on Thursday, wins his second race of the year. Remember, there's a time when we're talking about, we're not going to deviate from our topic too much here, but there's a time when people are talking, is Chase Elliott ever going to get it going? And there he is. 2 wins within 2 months of each other and on his way to the round of 8. And it's just, this is a great time. And I think this is what's reminiscent. I think that's why I've enjoyed 2018 so much. I think this is what we saw in 2001, was just the changing of the guard unofficially and some newer faces making an impact like they should have. So Waltrip gets his first win of the year, his first career win ever. DEI, what a and you look at Michael up to that point, and it's nothing to disparage the Wood brothers or Bahari Racing or any other place where Waltrip had been employed previous. This was a great move, I think, for DEI, and I think it fell on a lot of criticism. I think a lot of people thought Ron Hornaday Jr. should have had this opportunity to move up with DEI, as he was a benchmark of consistency in the Truck Series and went on to win championships for DEI in that series. And I think Waltrip, this was much deserved for a guy that I think a lot of people wrote off by 2001, and he had a chance to revive his career, and then we went on to do great things as an owner, driver with MWR, and now you see him working for Fox and covering the truck races for FS1. And Waltrip really had an interesting career, and I think looking back on it, this was his big break, and I think he made the most of it for what it was worth. But in all essence, I don't think he was quite in the league of DW, Darrell Waltrip, his brother. But great guy. I mean, he seems to be one of the more likable drivers through history. Very popular with the fan base. Quite an entertainer, and it was good for him to finally to win. And it was refreshing to see that in victory lane that year. Harvick, as we mentioned, that great last lap finish with Jeff Gordon, wasn't that some? This is crazy because we're going to talk about them a lot in this episode. They had a great battle at Dover in that race. Harvick was the real deal, and you could see it back then. That Harvick is something special, something magical in the air that year, and Harvick was he's one of the big three now. So Harvick is a talent, I think, a generational talent. And they say that this is something that comes around once every often. I think you could fit Harvick into that category. I think Harvick's done a tremendous job of racing when it counted, and he's a meaningful driver. And I think what we're seeing today, this is a future Hall of Famer. Back then, I don't know if we would have quite went that far and said that, but you could see that it was something special about Mr. Harvick back in the 2001 season. Did really well, went on to win Rookie of the Year, and Elliott Sadler as well. It's ironic now, he's calling his career in 2018 at the conclusion. He gets his first win in Bristol earlier that year. Memorable race, the 21 Wood Brothers and the 43, Johnny Andretti at the time, the Petty Enterprise car. It was sort of like a blast from the past. You're seeing two of the most iconic teams, numbers in the sport, battling it out in 2001. And Elliott Sadler pulls out the win there. He gets his first career win. He was a part of that rookie class in 1999, as we talked about in our first bonus episode. I expected a little bit more fight in Elliott when it came to battling Tony Stewart for that. I know Tony Stewart was the odds-on favorite. I mean, I'm not going to say it was one of the weaker rookie classes in NASCAR history, but looking back on it, it didn't age well. And it really was a lopsided affair, but Elliott Sadler was all right. He went on to enjoy great success at the Cup level. 2004 stands out to me. And took a step back and went back to Xfinity Series in the hopes of maybe gaining traction and catching the eye of somebody to get another ride in Cup. But it never happened for him. But nonetheless, Elliott Sadler's had a great career, great accounting for himself, and we're surely going to miss seeing him on the racetrack in 2019. Ricky Craven, one of New England's finest. I think, and we talk. He's going to come up a lot in this episode too. It's just funny when I go back and I watch. I really enjoyed this race. I mean, we look back at races, and I think back then, as I was still very young in 2001. I didn't quite get the depth, and I didn't quite understand really was the business of racing and the politics that goes into how drivers are selected, how sponsorships emerge, and to see Ricky Craven win at Martinsville. And there was a lot of talk about Craven in this race. I think Craven had run really well at Dover in June. He ran a fourth. And he was gaining a lot of momentum in the Cal Wells PPI 32 car. And he did tremendous in that equipment. That equipment wasn't some of the best. I mean, I know for what it's worth, I think Cal Wells' foray into Cup racing would be considered moderately successful. I mean, he is, who could forget him and Kurt Busch at Darlington? That's iconic. So the 32 had its time in the sun, and he would win at Martinsville in October of 2001, a race I played hooky from school to watch. So all these years later, if anything, it's entertaining. Craven, I mean, growing up in the East Coast, in Brunswick and that area, that geographical area, we got a lot of the cable affiliates from Maine and New England, Boston. So it was really cool to see that. I can't remember the affiliate. It was an NBC affiliate in Maine. It escapes me the actual name of the station. Maybe I'll throw it in my Google machine. I always could remember any time they covered sports in their news broadcast, Ricky Craven was always highlighted, regardless if he would finish 40th or would win the pole or win this race. Craven, the people of Maine, this is their driver. Craven, and a lot of the great drivers, look from what you're seeing in New England. Another great driver from New England we're going to talk about here today, Jerry Nadeau, Joey Logano. You're seeing it now with Ryan Preece, who's going to be in Cup full-time in 2019. So there's that presence in New England and the East Coast, where Steve Park as well, who's from New York but raced in the New England area. Truex Jr., same idea. So it's good to see drivers not just from deep in the South or from a certain geographical area find success. And I think that's I think Craven at the time, we have a lot of successful drivers from New England now. I guess case could be made. Joey Logano might be the most successful driver out of New England. But at the time, Ricky Craven really was the top dog, and to see him triumph after some of the issues he had with his health that ended his run with Hendrick, popular victory, and it couldn't happen to a nicer guy, right? What a good dude Ricky Craven is. And he's doing really well at ESPN. Some of his columns you see there, he writes for ESPN. I guess he was covering some of the in-studio work for them, and what a good dude. What a cool guy. It also saw the resurgence, and Robbie Gordon. Let's not forget about Robbie Gordon as well. He would win his. We'll get to a resurgence of some of the vets in a minute. That's what I was kind of segueing there too. But we forgot Ricky Rudd. Excuse me, not Ricky Rudd. I will talk about Ricky Rudd in a few minutes here. I'm getting fired up. This is a great episode. I think this was 2 weeks in the making. Sorry for the delay, but I'm just really fired up. This is a great race, and this was I think we're just going to be a tremendous episode, if I do say so myself. Robbie Gordon would win in 31 for RCR, and Lowe's was on its way out. We'll talk about that a lot in this episode. And we know what they went on to do. And ironically, in 2018, they're just in a few short races, they won't be in the sport anymore. But Robbie Gordon would win at the postponed race for Loudon of the week of 9/11. As you always know, at that time, they were in New Hampshire. That got pushed back to Thanksgiving Day weekend in the USA. It's ironically Thanksgiving in Canada as we're recording this. Happy Thanksgiving to y'all if you're listening in Canada. Gordon would win under controversial circumstances, but he would win the finale at Loudon. And that was another. Robbie Gordon had been around the circuit in NASCAR trying to break through the late 90s, early 2000s. Was a kart standout, open wheel background, tremendous driver, a lot of guts, a lot of glory, and he finally would win a cup race here, albeit he had a little run in there with the other Gordon, but nonetheless, got to do what you got to do to get the victory sometime. So here we go. We had a resurgence of some veterans who just were trying to find their way back on top. Bobby Hamilton would win his first race in over 2 years. He was racing for Andy Petrie at the time, the 55 Square D car. Longtime employee of Morgan McClure Racing, who, again, it's just funny how there's so much that's just connected in this episode. We're going to talk a little bit about Morgan McClure in this episode. I never thought we'd be talking much about them, but another iconic brand, another iconic team in NASCAR history. The number 4 Kodak machine, who could forget that? Won some Daytona 500s, but we'll get to that in a moment. So Hamilton, he won after almost 2 years of struggling with Morgan McClure. And then also he was working on a contract extension, which was touched on in the broadcast for Bobby Hamilton and Square D Schneider Electric signing on for 2 years at the time, so he could remain in the Andy Petrie 55 car. Ricky Rudd, this was his first win in almost 2 years, and Ricky Rudd became a championship contender when he emerged as the favorite at the end of 1999 to drive for Robert Yates, and he was putting a bow on his team. Again, one of the last few great owner drivers in NASCAR. He would pick up a win that year in 2001, get himself back in the winner's circle in almost 2 years. Sterling Marlin would be the same thing. His first win in 4 years. Sterling Marlin emerged in the early 2000s as championship contender, and just as me again, freestyling. I think he'd not get injured. 0-2, Sterling Marlin's your champion. Unlikely champion, but he's your champion. And then Bill Elliott would win his first race for Ravenham in this season. First time in 6 years. So this is pretty cool that you had the tale of 2 seasons. You had the emergence of some really young guys and drivers that had never won a race, been around a while, but hadn't won. And then you have the veterans that looked to be, at some point, left for dead, maybe forgotten, long gone and forgotten, and here they are back in the winner's circle. So it really was, I think, again, I'm just going to put it over. I think 2001, one of the greatest of all time in NASCAR history. So as we said, this is the first race post 9/11. Dale Jr. would win his second race of the season here. First trip back to Daytona in July would be his first win of the year. I mean, his first win since that tragic day. At this point, he is the most popular driver in the sport. And this race in particular, he would lead 193 of the 400 laps the distance here. He would win 5 races. DEI itself, as a collective group, would win 5 races in 2001. Dale Jr. would win in July Daytona, as we mentioned, here at Dover. And then he would win at Talladega in October. Steve Park would win the second race of the season at Rockingham. That was timely, if not, was it not? And we all know about Darrell. Here, oh my goodness. Take a deep breath here. I'm just all fired up about this episode, can't you tell? Waltrip winning, Darrell Waltrip's younger brother, Michael, winning for Dale Sr. at Daytona and the Daytona 500. We got it right. Damn, see that? Perseverance. We got it right. So Dale Jr. would finish 8th in the standings that year. Didn't seem to be much of a championship contender, and I know the armchair quarterback, dirt sheet writers will say, well, he wasn't focused, losing Dale Sr. Stop it. Stop it. The circumstances were what they were. I don't think it's wise to read too much into anything that we weren't there. And you don't know what this individual was going through, the emotions, what he was feeling. I commend him highly for getting through the season and soldiering on. And it is what it was. And I mean, that's just the best of it. So he had proved his numbers from his rookie season in 2000, where he would win 2 races. At that time, top 5s, we had 3, top 10s for 5, 2 poles, and an average finish of 20.9. And he was 16th in the standings. So he would beef that up in 01, puts himself in the winner's circle 3 times, 9 top 5s, so there's an improvement in the top 5s, and 15 top 10. So big change there, big drastic number. 2 poles, average finish would go up to 15.2, and this would be his, he'd be 8th in the standings. As you know, he was the champion in the then Busch Series, now known as Xfinity Series, and 98 and 1999. So, and he would race in 5 races in 99, and he would run from DEI from 99 to 2007, and 15 career wins of the 76 came with the team. It was a really, Dale Jr., you look back, he was a dangerous contender for the title back in 03 and 04, working with Tony Eury Sr. Then he would transition to work with Jr. Never really worked with Tony Eury Jr. I feel like the chemistry he had with Eury Sr. carried through and carried him to where he was at that point in his career. And Dale Jr. could never quite duplicate that, but I think he did really well with Greg Ives, and he had a little run there at the end in 2015. It looked like Dale Jr. could have pulled it out, and I guess there was a lot of pressure on him through the years to perform, live up to the name, and nonetheless, great race car driver, and I think he is one of those guys that is going to go down as one of the sport's all-time greats. So we're going to get into some news items that were topical around that time. Morgan McClure certainly was in the news a lot. And let's just get to some of those news items before we continue with this episode. And we're going to get to the race shortly. We're going to wave the green flag here momentarily. So as we know, the race was this is a press release. The race was going to be postponed at New Hampshire. So here's a press release. Thank you, Jayski, for the archives. And we were able to go back and look for some of this information and provide it to you. So the race was postponed until November 23rd. So here was the press release. It says, hearing from good sources. That's kind of funny in itself. Good sources. It's a rumor and innuendo out there in sports, folks. And, well, this came from a good source. So it constitutes a good source. But anyhow, that the New Hampshire race has been postponed, not canceled. There was a point at one time that we're just going to write this one off. And rightfully so. I mean, what was going on in the country at the time, I think NASCAR racing or any form of sports entertainment was not on anyone's mind, or for the short-term future. I don't think really anyone cared. I think it was all about just healing and getting back into a normal routine and living your life. And NASCAR definitely wasn't getting on the minds of anybody. From this weekend until the Friday, November 23rd, 2001, the day after Thanksgiving, and in brackets, it will be cold. In New England in November, I imagine it is cold there. It's really cold in November in the East Coast, is it not? The field will be set by owner points, and it'll be a one-day event. And here was the update. It's at the NASCAR Cup race at New Hampshire on Sunday was postponed because of the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. And the move to put off the New Hampshire 300 announced by the Speedway's owner followed a decision by the NFL to scrap its games for the Sunday. Looking back on that, as much as I enjoy NFL football and love the sport, that I couldn't Sunday without football. But given the circumstances, it was more important things, right? Seeing a family pray and love one another and hope for the best, I think at that time was all that people really were invested in. So the race was scheduled for Friday the 23rd, the day after Thanksgiving. It was the NASCAR's decision, but we agreed that with 100% of the track owner, we hated to postpone, not cancel. But at the same time, we have to think of the people and all the problems they have in New York. I think all of our fans will understand and will honor all their tickets. About 4,000 fans in mobile homes already had arrived at the track, and some of them as early as last Saturday. The race, the second of the season at the 1 mile oval, attracts about 100,000 fans from across the country. In Canada, it is only the second non-weather postponement for NASCAR in the last 30 years. In the 1998 race, the Pepsi 400 in Daytona, was postponed in July until October because of the forest fires there in Central Florida. And ironically enough, we are covering that race coming up later on this month. And that was a sight to see, was it not? I'm just going to get off the tracks here for a minute. Wasn't that race at Daytona the first time ever under the lights? Man, that was a sight to see. Can't wait to cover that one. I am fired up for that one as well. So it said about the postponement of the race. NASCAR race at New Hampshire International. The race had been rescheduled, as we know, and the cancellations. There was also would be cancellation of the Busch North cars and the modified tour, which seemed to run companion races with Cup races at New Hampshire. Still do. So I think that was a great decision. And in hindsight, nobody would have been focused on racing, and it's just not something that would have aged well or would have been anyone's. It's just an afterthought. It's just the race. There are more important things going on at the time, and just racing wasn't one of them. It's really hard for me to cover this because anything like this, I think you just look back and we'll move on. It's difficult to talk about some of this, honestly, because I remember it so well, and I think most of you listeners will as well. And it's just something that I'm glad everyone got through things and was able to soldier on. So let's move ahead here. So also around this time, Ultra Motorsports, Jim Smith, had a great standout in the Truck Series. Had one of the original Truck Series owners when the series started in 1995. Was contemplating taking Sponsor Time Nations rent to court. Ultra Motorsports owner Jim Smith says he won't run his Winston Cup team without sponsorship for next season. He does, however, expect to have a Busch team in addition, which never came to fruition, by the way. In addition to a two-car team entry in the Craftsman Truck Series, He plans on running a Dodge in the Busch Series that will convert his Cup team into Dodges as well if it still exists, which did transpire. The Truck Series star Ted Musgrave expects to drive the team, but exactly what he will drive is uncertain. He has heard from a few Winston Cup teams, but said that they're currently lack of sponsors, so he's wary of signing anyone else. Problems with Nations Rent, meanwhile, will likely send Smith to court. We have a contract for next year, Smith said. They're in financial trouble. I don't know. I see us in court very soon. So the team would survive, as we know. Ultra Motorsports would fund a car in 2002. So he shot down the rumor in India into where they were closing. There was issues with the sponsor Nations Rent, and they tapped Casey Kane, long before Casey Kane. Casey Atwood, tale of two Caseys. So Casey Atwood in 2002 would be ousted by the fall of 2002. They had Jason Leffler in the car. God rest his soul. I think we're going to do a Jason Leffler episode eventually. I think Jason Leffler is one of those underrated guys in NASCAR, is he not? Tremendous wheelman, and we lost. He left us way too soon, and this is just one of those times where I think right place, right time. Who knows what could have been of Jason Leffler? I think he could have done some great things in the Cup level given the right opportunity, and we never got to really see that. But for what it was worth, he had a really great career in trucks, and he actually would drive Jim Smith's truck in the Truck Series and do really well at it. And so this didn't work out for Ultra Motorsports. I think they would get some sponsors from Sirius Radio and run with Jimmy Spencer toward the end of their existence. And I guess, again, it's one of those, it's hard to really be competitive at Cup, not only as a driver, but an owner. As we all know, Jim Smith and Ultra enjoyed tremendous success at Mike Wallace and other drivers in the Camping World Truck Series, known as Craftsman Truck Series then, but never quite could translate that to the Cup level. And he would do really well with a guy like Ted Musgrave, and it just never quite could make that transition for whatever reason. But that's where they were sitting at the time, around September 13, 2001. They were contemplating their future beyond 2001 in the Cup Series, and we all know how that ended. They would leave the sport not long after. So there was still a lot of times that going back into 2000, and this was on September 11th, actually, the day of that event that changed American history forever. There was a Kansas testing that day. The new track Kansas would debut. The first race would be a week after this one at Dover that we're covering today. So you had Bobby Labonte, who was driving for Joe Gibbs at the time, Dave Blaney for Bill Davis Racing, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. for DEI, Joe Nemechek for Indy Petrie, and Brett Bodine, who was running his own team, were testing for the upcoming race on September 30th at Kansas on the 10th and 11th. And the Valvoline Pontiac team, which was driven by Johnny Benson Jr., was in the process of returning to Charlotte via automobile Tuesday afternoon after canceling the second day of the scheduled test day at Kansas City. Crew chief James Inch and was there, and was no desire for the driver Johnny Benson and other teams to take part in the test after witnessing the attacks in New York and Washington. Said that emergency aircraft were not available in case of an accident at the racetrack. We felt it was best to come home, said Ince. We just wanted it just wasn't any desire to run after we'd watched what we'd watched on television today. And the 93 Cup team loaded up immediately and began a 16-hour drive home from Kansas City after seeing the devastation in New York and D.C. And the core group of the 93 team, which included at the time Dave Blaney, crew chief Doug Randolph, and other members of the team were completed yesterday's plans, but could not fly home today via King Air 300 for obvious reasons for Bill Davis, and also the GNC 36 Brishka national team that also canceled its test at Kansas. That was CC Scott Welliver team, I believe, 36 GNC. I think it was driven by, at this time, I know Hank Parker Jr. was in that car. you'll have to throw it in the Google machine. But that's irrelevant. We're not talking about that right now. But that was just brought back a memory of that team quickly here. So we'll move on. So it was testing. As I said, this is Kansas's foray into NASCAR. It was a great track and a very fast track, by the way. And now it's plays a crucial part in the all these years later, 17 years later in the NASCAR playoffs in a couple weeks. It's an elimination race. So Morgan McClure, as we said, was so topical around this time. They were contemplating a second team. We've heard that for years about Morgan McClure Racing, about expansion, about putting another driver in the car, and sponsorship always was an issue because, as I said, Morgan McClure, as anyone who knows the sport really well, was an underfunded team. Family business, didn't quite have the resources some of the larger teams did. So I think to see that what we saw with them was quite interesting, and they never did expand. They were not long for the sport much. Well, they lasted a little longer than I thought most people did, but their time as being a contender and a real force in the sport were long gone around this time. And so here's some press releases in regards to this. It says here, this is from September 10th. Morgan McClure was exploring a second car. 2000 year was a rough year for Morgan McClure. They started up the campaign with Robbie Gordon. He's cut after 5 races. They take a chance on Kevin LePage after 2.5 years with Roush Fenway, or at the time just Roush Racing. That never worked out. Kevin LePage is one of those other guys, another New England driver. Seems to be a running theme here that we're talking a lot about New England's finest here. For whatever reason, he never quite found his way either. And it was just a tough year for Morgan McClure. It really was. 2 Xfinity wins for Mr. LePage in 96 and 98. He replaced Ted Musgrave at Roush Fenway following Watkins Glen 98. His best finish with Roush was a pair of 5th place runs in 1999 Southern 500 and 2000 at Texas. Gordon would be fired after Darlington, the spring race, replaced by LePage. And LePage was fired himself after the Kansas race not long after. So Morgan McClure here was paying musical chairs with their drivers. They couldn't get it right. Bobby Hamilton Jr. would race the car for the remainder of the season, and McClure hadn't won a race since Martinsville in 98. So they were searching for something here, and they just couldn't find it. Rich Bickle also ran the car at Martinsville in the fall. He was rumored at one point to be part of the second car, or actually to take over the 4. That seemed like their kind of driver. I mean, Bickle, again, another guy that never quite really panned out. So Skinner, who wrecked at Chicago, Mike Skinner here, was to miss 5 races. Robbie Gordon would fill in for him in the 31. And Lowe's around that time was announcing they would be leaving RCR at the end of 2001. So there's a lot of uncertainty about Mike Skinner. And it was even touched on in the race, the broadcast when we covered the race at Dover about the future of Mike Skinner. So following the Dover race, Skinner announced he would opt for surgery to repair an ACL tear, ending his season. Gordon later announced as his replacement for 2002, and he would win this, as we said, the season finale at Loudon and go on to have some success with that car, have career years in that car with RCR, and would finish as high as 16th in the standings in 03. And so at this point, Skinner was also being considered for the 77 team, the Doug Bowell Jasper team, as they were moving on from Robert Presley, and also for the 33, which at the time, Joe Nemechek was working out a deal with Andy Petrie, but Skinner's name emerged also as a favorite for that. So ultimately, he takes the 4 ride in 2002. Thus, Skinner pronouns pal. Eventually, essentially they were swapping rides, is what he was doing with Robbie Gordon. How Gordon took over the 31, he took over the 4, as Gordon started the year out in the 4. So Skinner would be released in 2003 and go on to revitalize his career in the Truck Series from 2004 to 2010, collecting 12 wins, and with Bill Davis Racing and Randy Moss finishing as high as runner-up in the points in 07. So Skinner, this was the end of Mike Skinner, really, and it's tragic how he had a really good driver here in Mike Skinner, who I thought was had potential to win a lot of races in Cup, but just never, for whatever reason, never really made it with RCR. And he would win those exhibition races in Japan. Only if they raced in Japan, huh? It could have been a different story for Skinner if the circuit was at Twin Ring Motegi was actually on the 36 race or 26 race schedule, however long the race schedule was back then. I think it was still, they were running almost into 30 races. Not quite as many races as we have now, but still a really long season. So McClure would cease operations following the 2007 season. From 1983 to 2007, they would collect 14 wins, 63 top fives, 146 top tens, and 13 poles, and were three-time Daytona 500 winners, with Ernie Irvan capturing that one in 91, and consecutive races for Sterling Marlin in 94 and 95. So clearly the highlight of Morgan McClure Racing was winning those 500s. That was impressive in itself, and the iconic Kodak 4 was in the spotlight, in the forefront of the spotlight at Daytona on 3 different occasions. So here's some of the press releases about Morgan McClure. This is another small outfit. Morgan McClure Racing is trying to land another primary sponsor in an effort to add a second team. How much might either organization benefit from the addition of a second team? Greatly, at least according to Larry McClure, the owner. Having more money and a second team allows you to do more things economically. As you know, it was still trying times economically in 2001, and it still is to this day, to find legitimate sponsors who are going to commit to a NASCAR team and invest their time and money into that. So it's still a challenge we're seeing in 2018. Having more money and a second team allows you to do more economically. I read that already. You can run that second team more cheaply, kind of like a satellite team, as they say in there. So rumor and innuendo. You kind of know where they're going with that. But anyhow, then the first. Another team would also allow you to do certain things that you can't with just one. Try more things with the engines, the chassis, the aero package. And also with a second team, if one guy is complaining about something, the other guy isn't, you're able to get to the bottom of the problems a lot more quickly. So I guess compare notes, try different setups. I understand. Haven't heard or seen anything on this in a while. Thought it would be of an interest. And again, Mike Skinner was linked to this second team and ultimately winds up the primary driver. So he was on their radar seemingly from the get-go here. And it just said here in this press release, Skinner's next ride is unclear, and there is talk that he might wind up with the 4 team, which he did ultimately, and recent reports have Skinner going to Morgan McClure, not as a replacement for Kevin LePage, but as a driver of a new team. Word is that Skinner will bring some sponsorship with him, but there's no knowledge on what the sponsors might be. And it just goes on here to say that Skinner's talked with Larry McClure, but has not decided if Kevin LePage will remain with the team next year. And this was from McClure himself. I've talked with Skinner, but we're not negotiating anything. I've talked with several people. But right now, Kevin's driving the race car, and we're trying to go forward. McClure has had long looked into running a second team, but insists that not in the immediate future, maybe as a part-time team perhaps here. It was speculated on. And McClure is growing frustrated with the changes on his 4 team, but he isn't going to make at least one. McClure said Friday that we'd have a new driver for his Winston Cup program in 2002, and he said he did not renew the contract of current driver Kevin LePage, which expires at the conclusion of the season and by September 1st deadline. LePage is the team's second driver of the season, as Robbie Gordon drove the first 5 races with the team before McClure hired LePage in order to test equipment to make sure it was up to the level of his competitors. McClure said that his engines tested on chassis dynos on other Chevrolet teams and had aerodynamics compared to Chevrolets that were running at the time and are in the line with other Chevrolet teams, McClure said, and there was no timetable for signing a new driver. So there's a lot of drama in the Morgan McClure camp, as you can imagine. They were really genuinely concerned, and they were a proud team. You look at it as this is a team that had won Daytona 500s, was a staple in the Cup Series for a couple decades, really, at that point. And they wanted to sustain. They wanted to recapture some of that magic, and why not? Good for them. But it just never quite could find their way into the new millennia. And I'm impressed they went to 2007. Granted, that was a time where they were light years behind the other equipment. I think then the COT was coming in around that time. And just so many changes that you just knew they couldn't compete anymore. That they're best days were clearly behind them, but good on them. They had a lot of perseverance, and they wanted to overcome and raced the little hearts out, and good for them. But we're going to go back to some other topics here in the time. So there was a Dover rumor. New Hampshire instead, it says, so here was something about if this Dover race would even be run back to the 23rd of November. So here are unconfirmed rumors and innuendo that this is under consideration to move to this week's race, New Hampshire, back a week, run Dover on the 23rd. That would have been a clusterfuck, would have not. Still was risky for New Hampshire, but Dover in November, yikes. But at this point, it is nothing but speculation, rumor, and innuendo. The above PR from Dover Downs, they dropped the Dover Downs name not long after. It's just be known as the Monster Mile. Seemed to indicate Dover's plans to have the race there this weekend. New Hampshire was, of course, postponed due to the attacks of NYC and DC in September 11, and Dover has a large military presence. JSQ was stationed there, it says here in brackets, from 82 to 86, and the base is being used for the bodies of the Washington Pentagon attack, and teams are being asked to give up rooms needed by military personnel and families of the dead. Sources also say here there is no truth to the rumor that there will be at Dover Downs this weekend, and New Hampshire Dover swap was never really discussed or considered, and that the race at Dover was in jeopardy at all. That was not going to happen. They were going to run this at Dover regardless, and New Hampshire was pushed back to November. So we had to hear more about Kevin LePage. It came to light on September the 17th, so we're kind of dipping back into the Morgan McClure story here. Morgan McClure Motorsports has made a decision not to renew the contract. This is from J-Ski on September the 17th via the Sporting News. Not to renew the contract Kevin LePage as its driver for the 2002 Winston Cup season and beyond. The team will continue its efforts to take the Kodak Max number 4 film Monte Carlo back to a weekly competitive level. Never happened, but good on them for trying, you know. Morgan McClure has not made a decision on its replacement, which we know would be Mike Skinner would replace Kevin LePage, but this is on the press release for LePage. Future plans will be announced later in the season, and it also had here an update as well on this theme. LePage has signed a 3-year contract with his after his third race with Morgan McClure. However, the season has gone downhill since then, and LePage has an average qualifying position of 30.3, an average finish of 29.2, and has failed to qualify for 3 races. The driver and the team had an option that was not easy for both sides to get out of it, and said Lisa Sheely, M&M director of public relations, Larry didn't want what happened to Robbie to happen again. Basically, Larry had to let LePage know before the end of the season whether he intended to renew the contract or not. Under the circumstances, Larry informed him, pronouns, LePage, informed him that we would not be renewed, and the team has not ruled out bringing LePage back for next season. So this is where it gets ridiculous. So you're saying, and I'm sure quarterbacking something that happened 17 fucking years ago, but so we're going to fire you. You're not performing at the level we need you to be. A, we're not giving you fast enough race cars. B, you're not driving them fast enough. So, but if things don't work out with other people, we might bring you back. I think, as crazy as it sounds, I think he did race for them at some capacity later on. So, wow, it's just like, I can't get around that one. That's just, I'll leave that for what it's worth, and we'll move on. So the team has not ruled out bringing him back, but it seems highly unlikely. And with drivers like Mike Skinner looking for a ride in 2002, Skinner had visited the Morgan McClure shop last month, and according to Sheely, the team has interviewed several drivers. While they would not have a new driver secured by the end of the season, Morgan McClure said there's currently no timeline to fill the vacancy, and tired of talk that this team would not have the driver. Morgan McClure, its engines tested over the summer chassis with other teams like Penske and DI. It had aerodynamics compared to them as well. Mike Skinner has talked to number 4 co-owner Larry McClure about the ride for next season, and we know that LePage will not be back in. So that was the drama. That was Morgan McClure racing at the time. My goodness gracious, that was what a mess that team was at that point. But again, a team that saw its fair share of success, different time and different place, was just struggling to keep up. And I think that's a big reason why we saw a lot of the owner drivers in this time dissipate. Bill Elliott elected to find greener pastures with Evernham, and Ricky Rudd with Robert Yates, and look what it did for their careers. I think looking back, and we're not going to keep armchair quarterbacking and going into the what-if machine, but you've got to think if Morgan McClure was able to find an investor or team up with somebody or even sell off his assets, could have maybe gave new life to the team, transitioned to a superpower that the resources, I think now, if this, looking back on this, if this was a team that was still trying to put itself in the dogfight in 2018, I think teaming up and sharing or having a technical alliance with somebody instead of doing it on your own. So I think what's credible about them was they tried to do it on their own, and give them a lot of credit. They were resilient. They wanted to still hold on to, I guess, whatever. I guess, again, this is difficult for me to really talk disparagingly about this team because they had been a staple in NASCAR history. The 4 cars, legendary. Those colors, the gold Kodak machine, pretty iconic stuff. But I think they had a perception that they could recapture that glory, but reality says otherwise, and they ended up falling by the wayside and eventually became no more. And Morgan McClure Racing wouldn't live to recapture any of that past glory. And as I said, in 2007, were not long for the sport, and they were gone. So we're going to move on here to the Ultra Motorsports. There was an update here from J-Ski. And I'm sorry there, I just got kind of off tracks with Morgan McClure. I just think that Morgan McClure had a really good team at one point. I just tend to want to remember them for being winners and not a team that was on the back end in a state of confusion back in 2001 and 2002. So it says here, while contemplating taking sponsor to Nations Rent, Ultra Motorsports owner Jim Smet said he won't run a Cup car without sponsorship next year. So this was the first press release, and then there was here an update that Buddy Barnes and Scott LePage will lead the Ultra Motorsports NASCAR Cup team and the 7 Nations Rent Taurus beginning next week at the Dover race. Owner Jim Smith made an announcement Tuesday morning after accepting the resignation of Jim Long. We're moving forward, Smith said. We're not quitting. We're not stopping. We're going to keep doing everything we can to be successful. Both Buddy and Scott have plenty of experience, and they know how to run a race team. LePage has been the car chief for Ultra Motorsports, while Barnes was been helping with the R&D program and boat veterans of the Cup Series. And as we know, that team would continue, as we said, with Casey Atwood the next season and Jimmy Spencer the following, and would be out of the sport by 2004. So this is pretty monumental for its time. And Jimmie Johnson in Lowe's, as Jimmie Johnson would go on to, as we all know the story, 7 championships, 83 wins. Lowe's and Hendrick, colossal combination. So here's the press release here. As you know, Lowe's would leave RCR at the end of 01. Winston Cup team owner Rick Hendrick hopes to announce the primary sponsor for Jimmie Johnson's Winston Cup effort within the next 6 weeks. This is a press release from September 18th of 01. We have associates and all the things are done. We just haven't announced it yet, Hendrick said back on August 3rd. Probably sometime in the next 30 to 45 days. We haven't signed anything yet. If Lowe's indeed does leave RCR, rumors of the company could move to Hendrick Motorsports. So it appears that Haas Automation is also going to be an associate sponsor on the current 3 Hendrick cars. Could be a primary for Jimmie Johnson. And there's also indicates that Johnson, in his rookie campaign, was hooked up there with Jeff Gordon, and they did great things. So Rick Hendrick and Jeff Gordon are officially expected to announce their plans for 2002 Winston Cup team on Tuesday at the Media Center at Lowe's Motor Speedway, the house that Jimmie built. He had a great run in Charlotte, did he not? In the mid-2000s, amazing. So a letter of flyer was sent out to Lowe's and the race team fan club members. The letter says, in part, in 2002, Jimmie Johnson will take the wheel of number 48 Lowe's Monte Carlo and the team with 3-time Winston Cup champion Jeff Gordon as part of the ownership with Hendrick Motorsports. And you can catch, as I said here, a preview of the car as it will debut on October the 7th at Lowe's Motor Speedway, and followed by runs at Miami on November 11th and Atlanta Motor Speedway on the 18th. And you can see the image of the car, the iconic 48, which I think he's going to run the throwback scheme to that first paint scheme when they hooked up in 2002 a little later. I think that's we're going to see that at Homestead or one of the racetracks a little later on as Lowe's is making its exit from the sport at the end of the season. What a great run they had with Johnson from 2002 to current day, 2018. Iconic. We talked about iconic paint schemes at the top of the program. I think that qualifies as one. Does it not? Maybe the top 5. Maybe. But Johnson had a successful run with Lowe's, and 7 championships later, they are leaving the sport. But at this time, this was the transition from... and they won with Robbie Gordon, so that was kind of neat how Lowe's was able to win a race on the back end of RCR, and then now here they had such great success with Hendrick and Jimmie Johnson. So kart, Alex Zanardi, remember him? Great driver here. So he was injured around this time as well. The first kart race in Europe was renamed the American Memorial in tribute to the victims of the terrorist attack in the United States. ESPN announced that it would not carry Sunday's American Memorial race in Germany, instead of showing it on Monday afternoon in a tape delay. Here, 2-time kart champion Alex Zanardi lost both of his legs after his car was hit by another traveling about 200 miles per hour Saturday during the American Memorial 500. Kart officials described the 34-year-old Italian's condition as stable, but said that he had lost one leg above the knee and one below. He was airlifted to Berlin Hospital for surgery, and Kenny Brack won the race under the yellow flag. And it says here, Zanardi, the kart driver who had both legs amputated after a gruesome crash at Germany last week, and is now listed in critical but not life-threatening condition, and the doctors are performing surgery every 48 hours to clean out and remove debris from the wounds. Doctors have used drugs to place Zanardi in a medical-induced coma, and the amount of medication is now being gradually reduced. So this is tragic at the time. As you know, Alex Zanardi with Ganassi was huge name in the Champ Car series, championship driver, tremendous upside. It's just a tale of tragedy for him and a lot of the drivers in that series. So we're going to cover the 99 finale, and tragedy struck there at Fontana on October 31st of 1989. Kart was just on the back end, was it not, around this time? It would take a devastating blow in 2000, and good dude, man, that just career was altered in just the one race, and it was just sad to see that. And very again, we'll move on. Just a lot of, don't mean to be bringing up such sad events in this episode, but it just all seems to tie in at this time. I mean, there's a lot of things that weren't right with the world in 2001 of September. So there was here, we touched on it about Square D and Bobby Hamilton. So they were finalizing their deal around this time for him to remain in the car for 2 more years. pretty good run at Dover too. He got a lot of airtime. Benny Parsons put him over a fair bit during the actual broadcast. So that was Benny was always great at that, was he not? He always gave a call out to some of the underdogs out there and thought that they deserved some much needed television time, and good for him. I mean, it's nice to hear that he gave a call out to some of those guys, and I thought Benny Parsons, man, he's a tremendous race car driver, tremendous broadcaster, and man, he was just one of the greats of all time. So here, 500 career start for Mike Beam as a crew chief. The 32 Ricky Craven, PPI Motorsports. This would be celebrating his 500 race at Dover, the race we're about to cover. So that was his fifth 500 race as a crew chief. It was touched on in the broadcast. Alan Bestwick was kind enough to point that out. Give a call out to him. That was pretty cool. So also at this time, this race would be Bill Elliott's 650th career start at Dover. As we're about to get into the actual race here, I think I'm just touching up on some more news stories here, and see if there's anything else that's topical worth talking about here. So nothing of significance also around this time. I think it was just one of those transitional periods in September of 2001. So we're going to actually wave the green flag on this race. So here we are, 2001. The MBA Cal Ripken Jr. 400. NBC is covering the race. Opens up with Bill Weber narrating, perhaps there's no more appropriate place for the return of NASCAR Winston Cup racing than the state of Delaware. One of the original 13 states, its nickname, the First State. The state's motto, Liberty and Independence. Today, in the shadows of neighboring Dover Air Force Base, the Winston Cup Series is back. So that's, Weber is known for that. I guess a lot of the broadcasts at that time, these great monologues to open, to really set the stage for the race, to generate any kind of interest the viewers would have, and to pretty much have that dramatic, theatrical feel to the races, and it was pretty neat for its time, I guess. And so here we have Lee Greenwood perform "God Bless the USA," his big hit from 1984. The American flags out in full force in the stands. Live shot of Ground Zero. Patriotism at is what is best. Patriotic scene there. Greenwood giving it his all, and that song would make its way back up to the charts in 2001. Sort of became the anthem to the American people during this turbulent time, and would be followed the next year by "Have You Forgotten?" Daryl Worley, another country star who dominated the charts in the spring of 2002 with a really patriotic song that captured the essence of how the American people felt during this time. And I'd say "God Bless the USA" and those two just great songs for this time period, and help the American people, empower them to rise above just the pain and the anguish they were feeling at this time. And it just, wow, it was just, and then a USA chant breaks out in the stands following Greenwood's really touching rendition of his 1984 hit here. So Jeff Gordon was interviewed by NBC's Benny Parsons and Bill Weber prior to the race, and I guess he was the face still of NASCAR at the time, and he expressed his emotions, how proud he felt to be an American, and just glad to be back behind the wheel and give everyone a distraction for about 3.5 hours from just what they were feeling, going through emotionally, and the state the country was in at the time. And Gordon was the three-time champion and current points leader for this race. And then we had some post-race interviews from Dale Jarrett. Pre-race interviews from Dale Jarrett, Jeff Burton, and Kyle Petty, and they all shared the same sentiment that this is part of the healing process. They're glad to be back behind the wheel of their race cars, and hopefully that the American people will find salvation in this race, and they're out there to put on a great show, and they're just thankful to be American citizens and have the freedom to do what they love on Sunday afternoons. And that's the overall theme you got from them. So the crew at this point, races covered by NBC. You had Alan Bestwick, Benny Parsons, and Wally Dallenbach Jr. Benny, tremendous. As I put him over here just a few moments ago, tremendous broadcaster. I always loved to hear him and the emotions and the excitement in his voice when he covered a race. And Benny just truly loved NASCAR and was a big part of the broadcast team in the early 2000s, late 90s, and certainly missed. And man, he was just one of the greats, was he not? So the graphic appears here that Dale Jarrett was the pole sitter, his first ever at Dover, fourth of the season. And then we get the starting lineup graphic, and it says Jarrett is seeking his first win of 2001. And then they go through the lineup, and as Bestwick would point out, he would bring out his old stat sheet there and give you row by row which drivers. He would give it a little bit of a statistic on their career accolades at Dover, and they were the fastest car in the final practice, which went out to Elliott Sadler that race, and sort of just setting the table, right? So Ken Schrader's patriotic scheme, this became iconic, and this would be run by Kyle Busch in Richmond of 2011, where the M&M's team was sponsored by M&M's Mars. This car, 36 MB2 Motorsports, would remove the decals for this race, and it was just decked out in the American flag. It was one of the more iconic paint schemes. Got a lot of coverage that day as Schrader was interviewed by Parsons on the in-car radio before the race. And Kenny Schrader, like I said, who at the time was kind of tailing out towards the end of his career. As you know, Schrader still one of the greats of all time, will race anything on four wheels. It was nice to see that paint scheme, and Schrader had a really could have had a really good day there. I think he got a lot of TV time based on this paint scheme. I think they were talking that this took 13 hours to complete. The crew started at something like into the evening hours and finished up by 6 a.m. the next day on a Wednesday just to get this car prepared for Dover. So that's pretty cool. And then we had the pit reporters. I think it was at the time Marty Snyder, Dave Burns, I think Bill Weber was part of that as well. Were running through the field and giving you sort of drivers to watch. You know how at the regular broadcast here we give you 5 drivers to watch for this track. This was kind of their rendition of that. And I said Ricky Craven was 4th in June. He had won a golf tournament earlier in the weekend. He was looking for his first career win. This could be the prime opportunity. He's starting up front. Really putting Craven over and setting him up as really one of the favorites to watch during this race. And he wouldn't disappoint. He had a pretty strong run, but just in the end ran into some trouble, fell behind, never could quite duplicate what he did in the first half and the second half, and never really had a shot at it, but had a pretty good run early on. And I think little did we know he was still looking for career win number 1. He would go on to do that less than a month later at Martinsville. And Elliott Sadler was the fastest car in the final practice. Last time he did that, he won at Bristol earlier in the spring of 2001. So they're trying to recapture that statistic that maybe last time he did this, history might repeat itself. He could be in the winner's circle here. And we touched on Bill Elliott's 650 career start. It was mentioned by Dave Burns, and the only drivers that ahead of him at the time on the all-time career start list was Ricky Rudd, Terry Labonte, and Dave Marcus. And there was a graphic that showed he had 7 top 10 finishes in the last 13 races. So Bill would, as we know, would win later on in the season. So he would be back into the winner's circle after a 6-year hiatus. Cal Ripken Jr., the Baltimore Orioles Iron Man, one of the all-time greats in Major League Baseball, would wave the green flag. And we'd have Bobby Labonte and Dale Jarrett trade the lead for the first 2 laps of the race. Bobby Labonte was running MBA was sponsoring the Joe Gibbs 18 at the time. Had a really cool paint scheme, orange and black, in the colors of the Baltimore Orioles. And when you saw the in-car camera shot, his helmet was the iconic bird logo from the cap insignia of the Baltimore Orioles, and I thought that was pretty cool. Really neat paint scheme. And then when I was a little bit younger, and diecast collecting is still a thing, but I mean, the height of that fandom was late 90s, early 2000s. That would have been a pretty neat paint scheme to have in your collection. That little die cast there with Cal Ripken on the front celebrating the Iron Man, who would call it a career at the end of 1999. One of the greats of all time in Major League Baseball. Third baseman for the Orioles. So that would have been a pretty neat paint scheme to add to your collection. Benny Parsons here was really high on Dale Jr. in this race. And from what you were hearing in the garage area, he had a really fast race car, and they weren't kidding. So he started off in third, and Parsons pointed out Dale Jr. is someone to keep your eye on for this event. He has a extremely fast race car. So lap 3, Dale Jr. takes the lead, and then again, as I said, the commentators were over the moon how fast he was this weekend, putting him over. He would lead for a segment of 24 laps there. Jeff Gordon would work his way up from 23rd to 19. There was a lot of emphasis on Gordon in this broadcast again, and it's to create that championship drama. He had lost points to Ricky Rudd, who had won at Richmond 2 weeks prior. He had made some ground up on the championship, and this championship really wasn't contested. I think Ricky Rudd had a shot, but at this point in the season, you know what they have to do for ratings. They have to make this. They have to want to engage your interest in this. They want to keep the viewership alive. So I think that's a big reason why they were trying to make this title battle look closer than it really was. But Gordon was in real no danger. So Parsons, again, as he liked to put over some of the underdog drivers I talked about, Ron Hornaday Jr. in the 14 Conseco car was impressive during this run. The first half of this race, he was among the leaders, is super fast, running in the top 5. And after following some really tough weeks, some wrecks, Hornaday told Parsons that they're finally getting it together. So Hornaday wouldn't last much longer in this 14 car, as we know. The truck champion just could never quite find the same success he enjoyed, even at the Xfinity level and the truck level. Well, he's one of the... So that's why he made the Hall of Fame. He's a Hall of Famer based on what he did in the truck series, and for whatever reason, just couldn't make it in this car. So he would, at this point, take 8th from Kenny Wallace. He was subbing for Steve Park, and Bestwick commented that this team needs a good run. Speaking of Hornaday and the 14 with AJ Foyt, he finished 30th or worse in at 13 of the last 16 races, and he would takes the lead, takes 6th place from Todd Bonan at this time. He was running for Travis Carter. Just blows by them, and it was really cool. I think what I noticed about this race is how everyone was running at some point a patriotic scheme. The American flag was out in full force, even on the racetrack and in the stands. And a lot of the quarter panels had "I Love New York," the iconic "I Love New York" stickers, the decals there. So a heavy patriotic presence at Dover on this day. And in lap 11, Ricky Rudd and Dale Jarrett, the teammates are battling it out for second place. And Bobby Labonte was sliding through the field, and just as they were commenting on Labonte sliding through the field, he gets tangled up with Bill Elliott, puts a caution out from lap 20 to 26, as the announcers were pointing out Labonte's issues, heavy damage to the car. And then we would segue to Kyle Petty, who would lose an engine on lap 13. He was interviewed by Matt Yoakum, and as the graphic came up, he was the first driver to win on the concrete surface at Dover in 1995. And Kyle sort of jokes that didn't even get a chance to break a sweat. They're out pretty early. And this is the time when Petty Enterprises really was going through their difficult time. Kyle Petty had not been competitive in many years. He'd have one more taste of glory for his dad's organization in the 45 car of the Coke 600 in 2007, the fuel mileage gamble with the Coke Zero car, finishing 3rd, I believe. But this was tough for him as he had gone through his own tragic experiences in 2000 with the loss of Adam Petty. And it's really on the back end of his career, but it was just nice to still see a guy like that, and how Kyle Petty always seemed to just be optimistic about the future, knowing that, yeah, maybe this wasn't the best car and this team really had no chance of competing. They were really behind the 8 ball, and he gets some TV time there. So it's good to see some interviews from some of the guys that we really didn't talk about a whole lot at that time. So Ricky Craven would lead on the restart lap 27. He'd be out in front for 15 laps. And Labonte was interviewed by Matt Yoakum in the garage, pretty much chronicling that the 18 car was in some rough shape. And Bill Elliott would return to the track during that interview. We see him pull back on and make some laps. The caution here, Craven would be put out as pretty much Craven here put over big time as he takes the lead. Again, they're talking about him winning the golf tournament, looking for that first cup win. Again, they're bragging on how he had finished fourth at Dover in June, and what a strong performance for the 32 car. I mean, they put that over quite a bit through the race, but at the time you have to marvel in that. Ricky Craven was doing a lot for PPI, and this team was not really an elite team, nor never was, and Craven did an outstanding job driving that car. So lap 30th, Jeff Gordon battles with Harvick. This is for 12th, and as I said, these guys would battle a lot during the race. They had that iconic finish at Atlanta earlier in the season, and it still would battle on through the years as Harvick. We just didn't know what Harvick was going to become then. We know he was great, but just never imagined that he would be a future Hall of Famer and post the numbers he's posted in recent years. So lap 42, Dale Jr. takes the lead back from Craven. He battles for 7 laps. He puts the bump and run, Dale Jr. does on him, takes that lead. Hornaday to third, he's closing in on Craven, and then just Dale Jr. checks out. He is pulling away. And then Bestwick points out that the week Dale Jr. has had is run some really strong laps here, and how great he's been at Dover in his career. 2 top 10s in the last 3 races. His third place finish in June. So again, and then we talk about Wilson, the volleyball that was riding shotgun with Earnhardt Jr. that weekend. As he said, he was a huge fan of the 2000 Tom Hanks film Castaway. So it was a replica volleyball, and I think Parsons called it a soccer ball during the broadcast. But in any case, replica of Wilson was good for some ha-ha moments there during the race. So he is here. Lap 52, Red takes third away from Hornaday, as Red had clearly one of the strongest cars aside from Dale Jr. on this race. Lap 54, Red takes second away here from will take second place here. So he's moving up the field. And then on lap 54, we see Jeremy Mayfield hard into the wall, take a hard lick. The number 12 Mobil 1 car, some severe damage to the side of the car as it hits the outside fence there. And Mayfield would be released from Penske just 2 short races after. There was some controversy that we can talk about another time when it comes to his departure. But he would be released the following race at Kansas. And they said that they were taking him to a local medical facility for x-rays and CAT scans. Red leads 8 laps from lap 57 to 64. 65, Dale Jr. powers back to lead. Would lead for 104 laps here. He just was in a zone here, 65 to 168. And on lap 71, the third caution of the race comes up. Brett Bodine spins in turn 4, but manages to hit nothing. And this was a theme that Wally Dallenbach said happened in the Busch race the day before, where it was could imagine cars wrecking at Dover and not hitting the wall. At one point, Dover was just, and it chews up race cars. It's one of those grueling racetracks where you got to be really on the wheel, or you'll find yourself getting chewed up there by Miles the Monster. And Brett Bodine spins, hits not in lap start, Reese 78. Dale Jr. pulls away again as Hornaday battles Gordon and Craven in the top 5. Craven and Gordon make contact, and damage to the left front fender of the car. And the announcers would just go to town on this. All 3 of them. They were creating some high-stakes drama. Is Jeff Gordon going to be able to overcome? Is Jeff Gordon going to be able to weave his way through the traffic? Is this a big hit to his points day? They wanted him to run into trouble here. It's like, Gordon, this is Jeff Gordon. This is one of the all-time greats. He's going to rise above this, and certainly he did. Much emphasis, I said, here on Gordon throughout the broadcast, creating that dramatic theme about him and Ricky Rudd in the garage, and Rudd gaining 100 points on his title run after that Richmond victory. And then we see Kenny Wallace battling with Harvick. And then they put a comment here on Steve Park, who had that hard lick at the Xfinity race at Darlington earlier in the month. And giving an update on Park, saying that Kenny Wallace is doing a great job in this car, is really taken ownership of the one at DEI, but C Park hopes to be back in the car real soon. Kurt Busch would lose an engine here on lap 115, oil out on the track, so we're under caution here for 8 laps. Kurt Busch, it's pretty cool to be thought like young Kurt Busch back then in the 97 Sharpie car. It's pretty cool to see him on the broadcast. And Parsons with maybe the comment of the race. God love Benny Parsons here. Parsons says Busch was running on 7 cylinders. Now he's on 0. I don't know why that tickles me to death like it does, but pointing out the obvious, aren't we, Benny Parsons? So lap 125, the restart. Dale Jr. resumes the lead. Tony Stewart, a guy that was being bragged on by Alan Bestwick a fair bit in this race, and then he backtracked that a bit toward the end. Was running second here, right in third, solidly holding strong. So 5 caution laps, lap 130. Ron Hornaday spins out. Jeff Gordon gets into him. Collects Mark Martin and Johnny Benson Jr. and Ward Burton in the process. Again, focusing on Gordon. How did he dodge that one? He made it through another one. And this is the third time Bestwick says that Gordon has missed or been involved in an incident. He's playing dodgeball out there. Ping pong, dodgeball. Alan Bestwick, my goodness. Listen to you. So later they would interview Johnny Benson Jr., asking him what happened. He just said he checked up there, put his hand out the window, kind of signaling for Martin to slow down, backed right into him. Then you see the crew, cameras will take a shot on Martin's crew, working diligently to get that number 6 Viagra car back out on the track. And just as a microcosm of what Martin was going through in 2001, just an off season for him. So lap 130, the restart, Dale Jr. rockets out front of Tony Stewart, Ricky Rudd for third, Jarrett for fourth, and Wallace in fifth. And on lap 144, Rudd gets past Stewart for second. He's just plowing through there. And then here we go. Bestwick is sweet on Tony here. He says that Tony Stewart, I'm surprised he's not battling out there more up the front. I'm surprised he's not been a real factor in this race. 2 wins in the last 4. He's led 631 of a possible 2,000 laps here at Dover. And he is running, he finished third. He has an average finish of third here in the last few events here at Dover. So he's really putting over Tony Stewart hard, how he is sort of still in the picture here in competition. He's kind of competitive here, but not quite making the noise you'd expect from a guy who seemingly had owned this place in recent years. So WAP 148, we got Dave Burns reporting about Wilson for the first time. Talks about Dale Jr.'s fandom for the movie Castaway, and Dallenbach comments that Castaway movie the volleyball Wilson there looks pretty cool. And Ribs Bestwick says that he looks a lot like the Wilson volleyball riding shotgun there with Dale Jr. And Bestwick says, I like if you said it looked like Tom Hanks, then I'd be patting you on the back and saying thanks. Dallenbach mentions that Bestwick has a birthday coming up, the Big 5-0, and Bestwick gets a little dig in there and says that I don't think that's the number in front. Thank you very much. So it's just a little jaw and back. And Dallenbach was a cynical guy in the booth. I thought he was just one of those guys that he got his jabs in. Sometimes said things I think they're out of context, but that's just the personality he brought to that broadcast booth. I think he did a fairly good job at being a broadcaster with the NBC crew early on. But as time wore on, I kind of grew disenchanted with his commentary and just thought that. The same with Alan Bestwick. At one point, I thought Bestwick was one of the finer broadcasters in NASCAR, and I just sort of, for whatever reason, they lost their luster for me, and I wasn't really much of a Dallenbach or Bestwick fan in my later years there. So 163, 164, Red chips away at this, and then I think Dallenbach says, "You mean he's chipping away at it?" So just funny stuff that tickles me. I don't like it does, but commentary is so much different today than it was back then. But for any case, that tickles me there. So they rev back and forth between Dallenbach and Bestwick as Dale Jr. takes the lead, is really far out into the lead, and Bestwick retorts back that I still can't believe you think I'm 50, and Dallenbach says that's what I was told. So some silly shit there. On lap 168, Andy Houston spins out in turn 2, cautions out. Parsons makes up for the fact that, again, Gordon avoids another one. And these wrecks that are fairly similar. So there's Houston will wreck, Robert Presley would wreck, and Waltrip. And it seems like they wrecked all in the same corner of the track. And another caution, Ron Hornaday is interviewed, and he's disappointed he got spun out by Gordon. Questions his professionalism, questions that how could the three-time champ and the leader of the Cup Series race so carelessly and take him out. And it's a racing deal, and Hornaday seems to be just focused on upping the performance of that 14 car and getting it to where they think they're competitive. And on the lap 71 restart, Tony Stewart leads. But it's taken over by Dale Jr. fairly quickly on lap 173. Leads for 11 laps. And then Parsons comments on the 36 car again. Tells that story about it took 13 hours to apply all the decals on that car and what a beauty that car really is. And then Bestwick mentions here, and it's sort of like he knows something that we don't know at the time. And I guess Alan Bestwick knew what was going on, right? Sucka's got to know what's going on, and maybe he had the inside loop. But Bestwick mentions again about Mayfield walking. It was unconscious in the car. They got away on his own power, but now he's gone to the medical facility for CAT scans and X-rays. And he goes, I don't know if I made that quite clear enough the first time. So what is he trying to tell us? And it just seems coincidental, the timing and all of this. And then less than, 2 weeks later, he's out of this car. And guess that was the end of old Jeremy Mayfield there. So on pit stops, Gordon loses a lug nut and battles Casey Atwood here for 11th. And Ricky Red goes and gets past Dale Jr. for the lead. And would lead 184 from lap 184 to 344. So 161 laps led here. And Marty Snyder's putting over Waltrip as they're on track here. They're looking at Michael Waltrip putting over. What a good run he's having. And he spins out just as he's putting him over. Waltrip spins out, and 201 to 206 laps, 6 laps under caution. And Joe Nemechek gets one of his laps back under the caution. Had a really fast race car despite being lapped down, and would go on to finish 7th in this race. And Nemechek was, again, one of Parsons' drivers that he really put over in this race. And he was saying about how fast, just keep an eye on him. And then they did even a shot where towards the end of the race, Parson is where they're giving a sort of an in-race prediction on who they think could be a driver to watch down the stretch. And Parson really puts over Joe Nemechek. He says he gets that lap back, and he's got a fast car, and he might be one to keep an eye on by the end of this. And he was right. Joe Nemechek had a really gutsy performance that day. I think he was returning back. He missed the race in June at Dover. He had an accident in the Xfinity race practice, and he wasn't trepidatious at all about his return. He went there and raced really hard on this day at Dover. So the restart at 207. Red maintains the lead. Parsons and Bestwick put over Harvick. Bestwick leads. Bestwick chimes in that Harvick leads Kurt Busch by 62 points in the rookie standings. That is what a wide margin, he says, and this is his second. He is second in 2 of the last 3 races. And Parsons says he's done a great job at keeping the Goodwrench car up front with very little experience. Well, Benny, I love your commentary, dude, but did y'all forget he won in Atlanta? That battle with Jeff Gordon? Did you guys forget that? I think he did an outstanding job given his experience in that car. So lap 228, caution comes back out. You see Robert Presley spin almost identically the same position where Waltrip and Houston spun, and Bestwick comments again on Gordon playing dodgeball throughout this race. And this is another one. I don't think he was even all that close to the Presley spin. I think it was just a narrative that Bestwick was tirelessly running down here. And again, we said Parsons seems to be really high on Nemechek, putting over his great run. Lap 237, restart comes out. Red continues to lead. And in lap 245, Dale Jr. is battling with Dale Jarrett for second. Sort of the Dale and Dale show revisited here. So you got, as we know, Dale Jarrett battling with Dale Sr. in Daytona. Dale and Dale show. Remember that? So here we go. We got Wilson getting more coverage here on lap 249. Besser comments that not the original Wilson ball in there. No kidding. And oh, give me a break, Beswick. I mean, it's just he comments about something about again to you did after all, Wally. You did say that he kind of looks like me. And then Beswick comes back with, did you say that he looks like just some silly nonsense for the fact that he looks like him and he's better looking than the original Wilson and. Man, at things that these guys were entertaining themselves with. But, you know, it's nice. It's good light humor considering what was going on in the world at the time. Nice to see that these guys could take their mind off that and really, you could feel they enjoyed covering this event and they were putting their greatest efforts forward here. Lap 268, Dave Blaney hits the wall. Gambled. I think he took no tires in the previous pit stop. That gamble pays off miserably here. So 42... His 42 to 4th run ends because I think he started in the 42 position. Dallenbach very critical of the move, saying you really got to get tires here at Dover. It's just not a wise move from Blaney. Was not going to pay off. Lap 274. Rudd is in front of Craven in second. Good pit stop strategy for Craven here to get back some of the track positions. They said he was up front early in the race. Sort of resurfaced himself again even after scaling back a bit halfway through. Gordon is 4th and 279. Gordon battles Craven for 3rd. And Dale Jr. is way up there. And from getting way up there, he falls back here a little bit to 8th in the pits, but he wouldn't stay there for long. So lap 305, Rudd leads. Dale Jarrett's in 2nd. He's closing the gap. Maybe you could see a intense battle there for the lead between the two Yates cars. And on lap 311, we should give a shout out to Terry Labonte, as this is his 700th career start. But he is running back in 20th, a lap down to the leaders. 327, Ricky Rudd's in 1st, Jarrett's in 2nd, Gordon in 3rd. And the top 3 in the standings at that time, 1, 2, and 3. So just kind of shows you where the cars were at this time. The championship contenders all running pretty well nose to tail. Lap 329, Dale Jarrett takes the position here from Jeff Gordon and just drives off again. And takes 3rd place from him there, working his way up the front. And lap 33-34, Jerry Nadeau would work his way up from a 41st starting spot to 4th. And Rudd here would continue to dominate on 340 Red. And he was going to be credited with leading the most laps at this point, but not so fast as we all know what happened later. He's most laps. Craven and Rusty Wallace are up there as well. And he gets spun around while leading at 346. Rusty Wallace gets in the Rudd. Feelings that were lingering on from a race at Bristol where both guys were plowing into each other there and ultimately cost each other the race there at Bristol. So they revisit the graphic there and show what happened between the two at Bristol a few weeks back with Rusty Wallace and Rudd. Sort of retaliation, I guess, the announcers are implying for Rudd and Wallace. But, I mean, to wreck somebody or get into someone while you're leading, not exactly the wisest move there on Rusty's part. So the restart at 351. Dale Jr. takes the lead. Nadeau 2nd. Dale Jarrett's in the lead, Junior's in 3rd. Nadeau 2nd. And Harvick and Gordon are battling for 6th and 7th place. So you'd see a lot of graphics of them battling each other on the track a lot during this race. But 42 to go. Dale Jr. powers past Nadeau for 2nd place. And that would be it. He would just continue to drive on. And lap 362, Dale Jarrett takes the lead from Dale Jarrett. 30 laps to go on the racetrack. 34 to go. We see a great battle unfold between Rudd, Nadeau, and Jarrett for 2nd. And Dale Jr. checks out at this point. Will lead the most laps, 193 of the 400, on his way to his 2nd checkered flag of the season. So with 19 to go, Gordon takes 5th from Stewart. And Beswick comments on how shocked he is that Stewart, again, is not running up front, considering his strong Dover runs in the past. And says about Gordon here, puts him over, saying this is the kind of race he has where you think you have him out of it. He dodges a bunch of accidents, keeps himself in position. He could just very well win this thing. So he's really high on Gordon and provided a really good narrative, I thought, all race long about Gordon's. It really was a tale of two races for Gordon. He had been up front, been toward the back, dodged all those incidents. So that was a really, I think, character-building race for Gordon, and that's why he is a 4-time champion in 93, time race winner in the Cup Series. Good for him. Lap 3 at 89, the final caution comes out as Stewart spins around Dale Jarrett, but he gets into nothing. Stewart would be quite remorseful of getting into Jarrett there at post-race interview, said that they were really good friends, and that's the last guy he'd want to race like that. And Nadeau closes on JL Jr. for the lead. We see there as the final restart, but not enough. Restart 93, 94, single file. Dale Jr. motors by, pulls away from Nadeau. Gordon and Rudd battle for third. Dale Jr. takes the checkers, and in victory circle is just overcome with emotion. He's got Wilson there, and some of his victory celebrations at the time were so amazing. He was so much enthusiasm, almost childlike enthusiasm from Dale Jr. at that time, and he was just in great spirits. 40,000 all in attendance there on their feet. Dale Jr. will take the American flag and drive it around for his Polish victory lap as he celebrates the first race back post 9/11. And then we get post-race interviews from Jeff Gordon, Jerry Nadeau. Nadeau talks about the Hendrick team working their way up, starting to find that consistency. And Jeff Gordon talks about the day he had, and then we have Wallace and Rudd give their versions of what happened out on the track. There got a little bit of a heated discussion there in the back in the garage area, but the officials were there to intervene, keep the peace. And you have Dale Jarrett and Tony Stewart. Jarrett thinks this was a day that otherwise would be disappointing, but given the circumstances in the country, is just feels like a win for him. Satisfied to have a great finish at Dover here in the top 5. And Tony Stewart, as we said, was quite apologetic towards Dale for getting into him there. That's the last guy you want to get into. So here we go. We're going to do the final rundown here. Let's wave the checkered flag on this episode. And this was on September 23rd, 2001 at Dover, Delaware. So we have the official race time, 3 hours and 56 minutes and 19 seconds, an average speed of 101.55 miles per hour. And the attendance was set to be about 40,000 that day, 13 lead changes, and 11 cautions for 71 laps. So let's go through the running order. Dale Jr., the winner in the Budweiser USA Chevrolet for DEI. Jerry Nadeau, second place finish, best on the season for him at that point in the Rick Hendrick 25. Ricky Rudd, who had a tremendous day, leads 169 laps, comes home in third. Jeff Gordon dodges the bullets, comes home in fourth. Tony Stewart, fifth place, solid for him. Kevin Harvick, sixth. Joni Mitchell coming back, powering from a lap down for seventh. Sterling Marlin, who quietly had a nice day for Chip Ganassi, in eighth. Casey Atwood, one of the rookie contenders at the time, ninth for Ray Evernham. 10th for Bobby Hamilton driving for Andy Petree. Rusty Wallace would come back in 11th. Following the little dust up there with Tony Stewart, the pole sitter Dale Jarrett for the UPS Ford for Robert Yates with the American flag draped across the hood. 12th, Jimmy Spencer. Got some significant amount of TV time during this race, was running in the top 10 in certain pockets of the race, finishes in 13th. Elliott Sadler, 14th. Todd Bodine, 15th. Kevin LePage, driving for Morgan McClure, 16th. Terry Labonte, 700 career start, comes home in 17th. 2 laps off the pace. Ken Schrader in that iconic American flag MB2 car comes home in 18th place, 2 laps off the pace. John Andretti, driving for the King, Richard Petty, in the Cheerios car in 19th. Mike Skinner, one of his final runs for Richard Childress Racing in the Lowe's car in 20th. Jeff Burton was 21st for Jack Roush. Kenny Wallace for DEI in 22nd. Mike Wallace is brother of Kenny and Rusty in 23rd. Stacy Compton in 24th. Hutch Strickland driving for Jeannie Dunleavy in 25th. Ricky Craven, 5 laps off the pace, starts 5th, ends in 26th. Hermie Sadler, his second ever career Cup start at the time, 27th. Brett Bodine, 28th, driving for himself. Matt Kenseth, who usually was one of the standouts at Dover, comes home 29th. Bill Elliott, in 650th career start, is in 30th. Johnny Benson Jr., some issues in the race, 31st. Mark Martin, 32nd. Ward Burton, who spun also during that melee early in the race, 33rd. Ron Hornaday driving for AJ Fourth in 34th. Dave Blaney from 42nd to 4th. Gamble doesn't pay off, ends up crashing in the race, 35th. Bobby Labonte, 36th. Robert Presley in 37th. Buckshot Jones, 38th, driving for Richard Petty Motorsports, then known as Petty Enterprises. Michael Waltrip, the Daytona 500 winner, 39th. Andy Houston, 40th in his second to last run for Calwell's in the McDonald's, 96. Kurt Busch loses an engine there, 41st. Jeremy Mayfield, 42nd. And rounding out the field in 43rd, the King's son, Richard Petty, Kyle Petty. And there was 4 drivers who did not make this race: Rick Mast, Jason Leffler, Lance Hooper, and my good personal favorite, Dave Marcus. Man, he is one heck of a driver, is he not? Absolutely huge Dave Marcus mark. Hopefully we get to cover him in long form at some point in this program. So the point standings here, not much changed. Gordon leaves with a 2:12 advantage on Rudd. Stewart way out of there and third at 407 markers behind. Dale Jarrett 421, and Sterling Marlin in fifth, 484 markers behind. The win here puts Dale Jr. up to sixth in the standings, 499 behind eventual champion Jeff Gordon. So that's going to do it for the MBA Cal Ripken. As gimmicky as that is, and that's something I don't like, gimmick names for races. Just be the MBA Cal 400 Cal Ripken Jr. Listen to you. Anyway, great race. Gets a thumbs up from me. I had a great time watching it, revisiting the Cup Series from September of 2001. Sorry, this was 2 weeks late. We should have been covering this. But in any case, we got through it. We're waving the checkers on this one. We have our regular scheduled program coming up this coming Thursday. Lots to talk about. Chase Elliott back in the winner's circle. Good for him. Guaranteed in the round of 8. So we're going to wave the flag on this episode. And I just want to wish everyone out there a good week. We'll catch up with you on Thursday. And thank you for listening. And we will see you later.